And Eric, we'll just ask you, Grady will ask you guys to do the same. If you're not a commissioner, if you'll just turn off your camera, and then we'll invite you forward at the appropriate time. Welcome, everyone. So before we get started, we have one small housekeeping matter that we have to address with regard to our electronic meetings. So I will read to you the following from a letter that I signed today that was, we revised our posting to include this. In accordance with Utah Code Section 52-4-207, subsection 4 of the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act, I have determined that conducting an electronic meeting of the Planning Commission with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination is based on the facts and circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. Considering the continued number of COVID-19 case counts in Utah, meeting in an anchor location presents substantial risk to the health and safety of those in attendance because physical distancing measures may be difficult to maintain at City Hall. And so I've authorized the Planning Commission to conduct this electronic meeting without an anchor location, and that'll be in effect for the next 30 days, and we'll reassess at that time. So with that notification, let's go ahead and we'll get started with a Pledge of Allegiance. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and I have asked Commissioner Summerhays to give us a thought or legislative prayer. So I will turn the time over to you, Spencer.
Great, thank you. My thought will be short. The background of my thought is, I don't know how it started, but 3, 4, 5 years ago, I started collecting a little notebook with little words of advice from more seasoned individuals. And the one question that precipitates that piece of advice is, if that person could go back in time and be there and give advice to their 20-year-old or 30-year-old self, what would it be? So my grandma, Frischnick, I asked her at her 90th birthday, what advice would you give your 30, 25, 40-year-old self? And she thought about it for a second and she said, be patient. And she didn't elaborate on it. It could mean, she could have meant that be patient with circumstances we're presented with, be patient with others around us, be patient with ourselves. So I think the parting shot message for tonight, and especially during the circumstances which we're in, as we see kids go back to school, as we try and continue to figure out some kind of normalcy in our lives, is to be patient despite what may be a continued drawn out long process to get us back to maybe what we thought was our lives before. And also as a good idea for others that may be listening to this meeting, or us as a commission, take a chance to ask those who you respect that have great life experience, if they could go back in time and give advice to themselves, as it were, what advice would they give? And I think you'll find some great snippets. So with that, I'll also provide a little legislative prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful to meet as a planning commission this night. We're grateful to serve the members of our community and pray that Thou will bless us, that we may make decisions that will help and bless the city of Centerville, and say it in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Sorry for the ring.
Thank you very much. That's a great thought. All right, we have 3 items on our agenda, so let's start with the first one. This one is a legislative decision. It's Parish Creek PDO rezone amendment at 1050 North, 950 West. And this was something that we had previously tabled. So we'll take it up again and turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Heyman and members of the commission. As Chair Heyman just noted, this has been tabled previously, or portions of this item have been tabled or discussed previously. The applicant, Tom Stewart Construction, has been building a 16-acre business park on the north section of the west side of town. And they proposed a few amendments, and a couple of those amendments tie back to the plan development overlay that was approved in 2017. So the commissioners and staff recommended that the applicant go through the PDO amendment process. So that's what's happening today. We have seen these drawings before, so let me share my screen. So this is the overall business park, and there are only a few things that they are seeking to amend. And it is the sidewalk around the cul-de-sac. So originally it was planned that there would be a boardwalk through each of these wetland sections. Due to engineering concerns and maintenance concerns for those boardwalks, they propose a new plan to eliminate that boardwalk from the east side and just have a connection across the street, and then have a back of curb sidewalk on the west side that will then connect to a new amenity, a picnic area, which I should be able to pull up. And so this is what the applicant proposes. In addition to the elimination of a canal trail that would connect to 1250 West. And the reason the applicant desires to eliminate that is because it's not all the land required isn't owned by the applicant. And then city staff have deemed it would be not the most wise use of public funds for this. So we've seen this before, and the one thing to note is that staff recommends approval of this amendment with the condition that the applicant enter into an agreement with the RDA to formalize the tax increment portion that would have gone to that canal trail, that they enter into an agreement so that everybody knows where that tax increment funding will go instead. The applicant has not yet had time, the RDA has not yet had time to finalize that agreement. So I've put a drafted condition that this is approved with the understanding that they get an RDA agreement. If they don't get the RDA agreement, then they'll have to come back with some other idea.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Does anyone have any questions for staff?
I'm wondering, so can you talk to me about how the justification for not having that walkway? Just, I know you said it was not a good use of public funds or something, but I kind of want you to elaborate a little bit more on that, because I know that was a kind of a thing that we had talked about it at length in the past. And generally the city with our complete streets ordinance encourages and recommends that we approve projects that work for a complete street. And so I'd like to know why this is an exception and what that will mean to surrounding properties.
And you're specifically asking about the canal trail that's been eliminated, or the rearrangement of the sidewalk, boardwalk?
Can you speak to both, I guess?
Sure, I can try. So starting with the sidewalk, a part of the original PDO stipulations was that the wetlands remain a part of the development. And so one way they had worked that out is by putting in, leaving the wetlands where they are through the project. They go throughout the project, and then having the sidewalk, boardwalk go through. After that was approved, and after they, looked at what it would cost to maintain that, at least the current standard for boardwalks would have to be replaced fairly often, more frequently than a sidewalk. they had proposed moving the sidewalk into just painted into the asphalt into the roundabout, but the city engineer did not approve of that methodology. So to eliminate, but still be able to have a walkway, they proposed this new design. There isn't much happening on the east side. That's where the majority of the wetlands are. So you'll still be able to connect to the rest of the business park, even though you'll need to cross the street with this proposal. And then as far as the canal trail is concerned, there is another company that owns the space that the canal trail would have to go through to then connect to 1250. And they don't want to participate in that. And instead of waiting for the time to be right, waiting for all the participants to want to participate in this project, city staff, even the former city manager, thought that there's probably better things to do with 1250 West than just connect this one little project via a canal trail to 1250 West, but there's more opportunity on 1250 to connect to Legacy more directly through 1250 West.
Mackenzie, I've got a question, and it relates to the extent of the boundary of the wetlands. It looks like they've done their best to design around it, but it looks like it still encroaches somewhat into some of the excuse me, into the hardscape. So do we know what the developer has done in working with the Army Corps of Engineers to, I know they can sometimes do some land swaps to create more wetland to do that. What's the discussion there? I mean, it looks like it's got to be less than maybe 10 square feet on either side of the cul-de-sac. But it kind of leads me into the next question is that, and that is, if they've been able to trade a very minor amount for the hardscape as proposed now, is there the ability to trade other wetland areas to make it right the way it should be?
I think that question will be better answered by the applicant.
Okay. Okay.
Mackenzie, if I can weigh in a little bit on that. If you look into the past, the wetland study was done and approved by the Army Corps. And so we're going to be back to trying to amend that Army Corps approval. What we do have is that the shoulder fill for the cul-de-sac area, the engineer says that there is room on the west side in that shoulder fill to put the sidewalk against the curb. The original plan was to bridge the wetlands. The Army Corps did not allow any further encroachment into the wetlands. And so the original idea was to bridge those wetlands. And part of the discussion was, would the city accept the boardwalks as the perpetual maintenance of the boardwalk? And the original approval put that burden of the boardwalks back onto the applicant. And in looking at the cost of the bridging, the maintenance of the bridging, our city engineer also agreed with the applicant that the boardwalk system did not have a good longevity, and it would increase the cost of the project. So so that's a short answer of why we've gone to this point. The long answer, but I won't go over it all, is have we gone back to the Army Corps to amend the wetland study? And that's certainly a possibility. The value of the wetlands would have to be then renegotiated. Is there a bank that you can buy into, which have become increasingly less opportunities to buy into the wetland bank? Or do we go back in and try to enhance the wetlands to some degree? And no, those complex discussions and the cost effectiveness of those seemed a little more burdensome at this point in time. So we've discussed this scenario as a solution.
Okay, I just wanted to know what efforts, having dealt with the Army Corps on wetlands myself personally on other projects, I know it's not a short and easy process, but I wanted to find out at least if the developer and the city had engaged, city staff had engaged the Army Corps to see if there was some trade possibility so that we could finish it out like it was planned originally.
Yeah, we could, you know, the ultimate requirement of the PDO, and again, this is a legislative decision based on enhanced design. Could we still do that? Yes, the answer is we could go through that process, but at a staff level, at the current discussions, nobody felt that that we should head that direction to solve this short distance.
Okay.
So I have a question for either you or Corey or Mackenzie. Back in 2017, when they made when they obligated themselves to do this boardwalk, what did they get in exchange for that obligation? And just from your perspective, do you think that we're kind of getting a good swap at this time? We're walking back what would have been pretty nice, and now we're getting 2 picnic tables and a slab. And I'm wondering, it doesn't feel like a one-to-one, so I'd like to be educated on that.
Sure, from my perspective, the exchange, the whole reason that this even became a PDO is that the terminus at the 950 going into this property, if you develop this property, you would exceed the 400-foot cul-de-sac length. And because of the wedge shape between 2 freeways, there's no way to create a secondary access to the project. So the primary reason of going to the PDO was to go a longer distance for the cul-de-sac length. One of the exchanges was the issue of secondary access and safety. So this development has a much larger right-of-way width. You actually can go double lanes on each side, and that's why you have the boulevard effect in this project. That boulevard effect was created so that if an emergency happens on east or west end, you can close off that with the apparatus and still function two-way traffic on the other side of the boulevard. So that was a significant difference in the project. We have a much larger street, but we designed it with a boulevard to have that business park kind of appearance to it. So that was a substantial give and take on the developer as well as the city's part on the PDO. The second part was to try to connect the development so that we could have some of that alternative transportation mode. So the idea is that somebody could maybe bike to work, probably not a high probability, but that possibility could be there. The other one was interior to the development, to have workers be able to walk around the project a little bit. And the wetlands are not the most high value wetlands. They're actually filled with quite a bit of Phragmites. But the concept is that somebody could take a lunch break in the development, since this was kind of a manufacturing zone, and walk around. One of the proposals for the connection of the alternative transportation element, the idea of another mode of transportation, was the canal road. That road has been used back and forth for maintenance for the canal. And the idea is to put a pedestrian trail down that canal to the west to connect to 1250. The problem with that is that you can use most of the canal for that connection, but you have to cross over to the south to the Hogan development to actually make the connection, because the Jersey barriers are on the north side of that canal. So there's no physical connection through the Jersey barriers. They talked with Hogan post discussion of this trail idea, and Hogan was not willing to accept an encroachment on the property for that connection. So then it became, what your question is there a good trade-off? The discussion with the previous city manager, which has been supported by the current city manager, and preliminary discussions supported by the city, not the city council, the redevelopment agency, was to take the value of the increment that would have gone to that trail. And so we established in that agreement what that X value was, transfer that value, And instead of the increment going back to the project, it would go to a connection from Parish Lane to Legacy in the north end. Obviously, that money won't cover the whole connection, but the city and staff agreed that the value, we're going to gain more out of transferring that increment to the 1250 West, because this developer is eligible for increment and could ask for increment participation in several venues. And we've agreed that moving that increment over to 1250 West is a higher value, and we can still use the roadway network in that manufacturing for somebody to bike in. So that's a long answer, but I think it covers it. There
Yeah,
is
it does.
some value.
One follow-up, why have a picnic table area at all?
The concept to us is not cutting off the other development. And so we came up with a pedestrian system, but the idea is features in the project. And so we discussed, is it some signing? Is it a pavilion area along the wetlands? And we discussed some other tongue-in-cheek ideas in there in the past discussions, and they're proposing this break area is what they ultimately landed on.
I have a couple more questions. Can you just help us remember, Corey, is this the same property that is currently having like a child care area?
Yeah, this is the same project. You'll see that east sidewalk terminates along the Coconut Cove, and then there would be a pedestrian crosswalk to the west side, and then you could carry through to the picnic area.
Okay, great. And this might be a question for Lisa or you. Are we bound by any requirements with ADA mobility issues to when we're doing new developments? If we are not, I know the city went back through all of our sidewalks on the corners and actually leveled out the entrance to the sidewalks and created little dots so that it was compliant with current federal regulations for mobility. Are we required to, with new developments, put that in? Like, how would that be affected by this sort of thing?
Those are public improvements associated with a subdivision. And so the construction plans would be amended and the ADA ramps would be installed at the crosswalks.
But there's no requirement for it to all connect to our public walkway system.
That is the public walkway system. So it has to have the ADA ramps at the pedestrian crossing.
I'm just saying eliminating the connection, that sidewalk connection, or the potential for the future sidewalk connection. That's what I'm wondering about.
There's no future sidewalk connection that I'm aware of. I'm maybe misunderstanding your.
I may be misunderstanding. I thought it was the connection that goes to 1250 West.
There is no connection. This is eliminating that.
There's still a sidewalk connection out the other way though, right?
There's still sidewalk running through the manufacturing park.
But it runs out to whatever
Eliminate
that other street is.
West connection.
Yes, this eliminates the canal trail to the 1250 West connection.
Yeah, so that's what I was asking.
Public access, as Commissioner Daley was explaining, is through that entry point.
So there's no requirement to have a public access at the end of a street where it connects to another street?
Well, it doesn't connect to a street, it's a cul-de-sac. So this was just an idea of a trail. I don't think it is required by ADA. But
Okay.
yes, the project will have to comply with ADA. And that would
Yeah.
probably be reviewed by the engineer during.
The canal trail is not part of the public right-of-way system. The
That's
canal trail is on private property.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to join us via video. So we would invite you to just turn on your video link and introduce yourself to us for the record.
Yeah, this is Lolo Tanifa from Tom Stewart Construction.
Hi, Mr. Tanifa. Glad to have you with us here today.
Nice to see you guys again.
You're welcome to speak to this, or we can just turn it open and let our commissioners ask you questions. Which would you prefer?
I think everything was explained perfectly. So yeah, I'll turn over the time back to you guys.
Any questions for the applicant?
I'll jump in with one, and I'll admit it's rinky dink. So the picnic area is bland. I don't feel like it's all that great. I'm just wondering why design it that way when I feel like there's no trees, there's no pavilion, and there's no shade. I'm wondering if those were considerations and whether or not there would be obstacles to put something in nearby to provide a little bit of shade to the picnickers.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at the development, we kind of want to match what we had with the existing. So we have some trees down that boulevard, down the street. So we're kind of matching that and having that dry scape surrounding the picnic table. So we're kind of keeping everything unison with what the business park looks like.
And Lolo, this is Ken Stewart. I'd like to add some commentary to that if I could, please.
Okay.
Yeah, so my name is Ken Stewart. I'm with Tom Stewart Construction. So we would actually like to embellish some of the landscaping around buildings that are there along the wetlands, but we're told that we couldn't. So we would like to do more personally. In fact, every time I go out there with my brother, Tom, who is the owner of the whole project, he's just frustrated about the landscaping not looking real good. Because I think we've done a fairly attractive building there and have been able to attract some pretty good tenants from it. So we'd actually like to do more. We'd actually like to do more landscaping along those wetlands. And, as they transfer, as they transition into the developed areas. So just a thought. I agree with you. We'd like to add more to it. Absolutely.
So have you actually proposed more, or has someone told you you can't have more? Can you explain that?
Yeah. We were told that for some reason, and I don't fully understand that, maybe Corey can explain it.
By staff or by someone else?
Yeah, by staff, that we couldn't, along the transition between, specifically on the building that Fiat Chrysler's in, specifically the transition between the wetlands and the Union Pacific area there, the land that we own there. We'd like to add a little bit more landscaping and take out all the, wetland type phragmite, but it's not part of the wetland, and actually embellish it with some more sod and trees and some other things along there. But we're told by, and again, I don't know, Lola, maybe you do know who told us that we couldn't do that, but that's what we'd like to do.
I can weigh in if that's okay.
Yeah.
The original PDO had two landscaping perspectives by when Jensen proposed the project, and part of it was by the developer, and part of it was a discussion with the city. The idea of the business park south of the wetlands was allowed to be more formal. And so I think the applicant has a lot of latitude under the PDO to improve the formality of the landscaping south of the wetlands. The wetland, beyond the wetland to the north side, fronted the Legacy Parkway. And during the discussion of that time is that they did not want to formalize that landscaping because the Legacy, the Shorelands Commerce Park directly across the way is the less formal and more of the upland landscaping type. And so when you had the lots, you originally had, I think, 4 lots. There was two lots east of the, or north of the cul-de-sac, and 2 lots south of the cul-de-sac or the wetlands. And the formalized landscaping was to the south, and the shorelands tying to the Legacy was to have a much more shoreland upland environment. Is there ability to adjust that transition? Sure. But we would go back in and discuss, where is that transition, or is it a total elimination and go to formal for the whole project?
Yeah. I mean, it was basically just to answer the council members or the planning commission members' question regarding
Right.
landscaping and embellishing it. We're happy to do that. We would like to do more. We want to create a first-class business park that attracts high-end tenants like Fiat Chrysler. So
And it was my intent. I didn't know if it would open a can of worms, and maybe it did. I'm just thinking maybe add a pergola, maybe add a simple awning.
yeah, we'd be happy to do
As
that
long as it's
part of
not
this
like
approval.
prohibited for wetlands purposes.
Sure, absolutely. And we'd be willing to work with staff if you're willing to approve it, to embellish it in, significant ways. Add pergolas, whatever we think would be beneficial to the park itself.
This is Spencer. I'm just going to chime in and say I'm with Mason. I'd feel a lot more comfortable in an approval based off of some kind of a shade awning. I like landscape, but as it relates to shade in a picnic area, some type of permanent structure makes a lot more sense for that area. Not a question, just a comment.
Sure. And we've been working with Brant and with Jacob on putting together some RDA funds for that, getting some of that tax increment on this as well. So we're willing to contribute to that as well, whatever to make it look better. Absolutely. We'd be interested in doing something like that.
Great. Any further questions for the applicant? If not, thank you both, Mr. Tanifi and Mr. Stewart. So we'll take this opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak on this matter. I don't see a ton of people in our waiting room. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. I love our staff. So thank you, Leah. If you would like to participate via phone, you dial 1-669-900-9128 and enter the meeting ID and the passcode that's on the public notice. And if you are liking to participate and comment via Zoom and you have a video, if you'll just go ahead and join us via video, and then I'll call on anyone. And I'll pause for just a second to allow anybody who might wish to participate via phone to dial in. Leah, have you seen anyone call in for this one?
I have not.
Going to take that as a no. We'll go ahead then and close the public hearing. Any further questions for staff? Any further discussion or debate?
Yeah, I will say that I am not really in favor of this. I know I might be alone in that, but I know we talked about this at length. I remember when this came originally. I don't feel like it's a one-to-one easy, equal replacement. We talked back then and we're concerned about having a crosswalk coming right in the middle of that wide cul-de-sac. I'm concerned about accessibility. We have connection points that I personally feel like we need to think of mobility. Obviously, as staff mentioned, that's not a public right of way on that north side where originally we were going to have that great sidewalk and boardwalk area. I think it really was going to add to the whole look and feel, elevating this project quite a bit. And the fact now that we don't even have a complete sidewalk system that's going through, you can kind of go around and then cross the street and then go around and then go here and then walk through the side. I guess you could walk or ride through the parking lot. I don't feel like it's following what our city has been trying to promote, which is complete streets. And I don't think it's considering mobility issues, and I don't think it elevates the property as a whole. So that's my view on things.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
I'll jump in. Becky, I think you've hit on the head many of the concerns that motivated a lot of my questions. It's interesting when as a development creeps forward, there has to be some give and take. And it feels like in many instances, there's more give than there is take from the city, if that makes sense. And so my question towards the one-to-one, I felt reassured by the fact that the increment is going to be adjusted in a different direction. So I don't share the concern to the same degree you do, but it is maybe not tragic is too strong of a word, but certainly is close that we're losing the connectivity. I would rather see that moving forward than not. However, given the constraints, I feel like this is an okay, although not great solution. So I'm inclined to vote in favor of it just to try to be workable and flexible, recognizing the sadness that we're losing the connectivity that I think would be better for the city to have.
Well, and I'll kind of respond to that. I know that other places in the city, we've required people to do the connectivity. And that means that sometimes a project has a street that ends and the next project, or a sidewalk that ends and the next project doesn't have it yet. And yeah, we have to wait for that to connect, or we have to wait for that to be complete. But that's kind of part of the whole game. And I also feel like since we've seen this a number of times, I want to be flexible and helpful to make sure that this project can move forward. But I do feel like you, Mason, where almost every time we see it, it's like, oh wait, but can we just do a little bit of this? Can we actually just take a little bit more? And each time I feel like as a city, we're like, oh, okay, well, and this to me, I'm like, oh, this is really, after all of these times that we've met with them and trying to figure things out, it just to me feels pretty disappointing for a really great project that could potentially be down there. And I think this is looking, I mean, we have very few times in the city, few areas in the city where we have full like development. Most of what we do in planning commission is look at a little redevelopment here, a little redevelopment there, a little subdivision thing here. And this, with all of these lots, these buildings, this major part of what we're hoping to see in that west side development, Shorelands development area, it feels like what we're doing is saying, well, actually, we have these standards, we have these things, and we don't care that much. So let's just see what happens and we'll just see what goes down there, when really, like, this is a major part of it. And we've done it before where we've said, let's make this work and it'll come together, instead of giving all of these too much gives to me. So
I'll just say that from a practical perspective, if there is going to have to be a renewed wetland delineation, because there are encroachments, albeit ever so small, I would like to know what that new delineation is, and will that new delineation allow for the sidewalks to be installed as they were developed anyway. It's because they're going to have to do it anyway. And Shaylin, maybe we have to ask staff again that question. Now, how long is it going to take them to get this renewed delineation line to allow even this plan to go forward? Because it is encroaching into the wetlands somewhat. Can we reopen that to staff?
Yeah, go ahead and ask staff.
Corey, does that make sense? You're going to have to do a new delineation anyway that we talked about. How long is that going to take you to get that resolved with the Army Corps?
Well, there's no new delineation with this plan. The shoulder is cleared under the Army Corps to tuck the sidewalk against the curb. So there is no new.
I'm looking at this plan and there's sidewalk in the wetland.
Yeah, it shows on a descriptive, but on the clearance, that cul-de-sac shoulder goes all the way, goes out and accepted by the Corps. So yeah, you're seeing it kind of in this visual, but that's all been cleared. And so we're not doing.
There's a room for error, I guess, that the Corps is okay with.
Well, this is, our city engineer worked with their engineer and said there's room to stay within what was approved.
Because I just, like I said, I see there's two corners on the west and the east side of the cul-de-sac that have wetland areas in them as planned right now.
I understand that visually, but we've talked with the city engineer and he's the one that's come back and said there's room. We can't put, there's no room to put the park strip in. But there's room to eliminate the park strip and move the sidewalk against back a curb. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and what is the methodology used to determine that there's enough room to do that?
It's where the dedicated plat lines work and what the engineers looked at in the study. I'm not qualified to say that the engineer is right or wrong, but Kevin, our city engineer, says we can't put the park strip in, but there's room to put the sidewalk against curb.
Okay.
So there's no new delineation there. If we were to expand it and try to do it, it comes back to the twofold. The first one is well, if we need to encroach on the wetlands further for any reason, we have to do a new delineation. That would be required for a new delineation. What motivated it before was that the boardwalks were going to span the wetlands. And so there wouldn't be an encroachment in the wetlands because there was going to be the park strip and then the boardwalks were going to bridge. And so that's been the motivation is one, the cost of that bridging system, and two, it's a structure within the right of way of the city, dedicated right of way of the city, but it's been by PDO approval, the obligation for taking care and maintaining that is solely on the private developer's part perpetually. And Kevin still feels like that even though we've done that, that's still a future liability for the city because if they don't maintain it, we're going to have to maintain it.
Yeah, and my question wasn't with regard to cost or future maintenance. Mine was simply, I'm looking at a plan that's been provided and there is a wetland shown on the plan in the sidewalk.
Yes, and I've acknowledged that, and I've told you our city engineers reviewed the construction documents and says we have room to put it against the curb, but not include a park strip.
Okay, and I'm just trying to figure out how he's made that determination if it's shown otherwise on a plan.
If you want, we can either have him provide a written response in writing to you, attend the meeting. I'm just giving you
Right, okay.
Our city engineer and their engineer have determined.
Yeah, I was just saying, well, maybe if he can make that determination, maybe he can make the determination that it can go farther, but you've already indicated that that's not the case. So I'm done.
Let me actually say one or two things real quickly on this one. I'm sympathetic to Mason. What you say is certainly on the whole give and take thing. That's something that seems to happen where the city gives a lot more than it takes as things go along. However, I do feel like that being said, it was probably a missed requirement on our part from the beginning to talk about that connection onto the 1250 West, just the way that it looks. I mean, 2D in a two-dimensional map type of a thing, it looks awesome. But in real life, the way that the canal goes underneath the road comes up right there. And in fact, the walkway on 1250 West is on the other side of 1250 West. So you'd have to get up and over 1250 West or under it somehow. It doesn't work. And like you said, I think that was probably a missed requirement on our part from the beginning, that we should have maybe picked up on that from a three-dimensional perspective, that it just wasn't going to be really very, very feasible to make that work, to get to the other side of 1250 West somehow. And then the rest of it, I mean, yeah, it's tough. And like I said, I don't like how the city's always seems to be giving, but maybe there's a way that we can make it a really nice picnic area, and that's something that we can get back from it. So anyway, in general, I think that, I'm supportive of the amendment given those caveats.
Any further discussion?
Can I ask staff a question?
Go ahead.
So looking again at the sort of the, sorry, my brain is not here today. The engineering mock-up, can you tell me what's the street that's to the south of this development? Or, yeah, south of it? And is there a reason why we don't have sidewalk that it stops right before, like, from what I can see, it starts, there's like the drive in and then it starts.
Let's see, where are we at?
So night, yeah.
Okay, so that's 950 West. And then the project entrance is here. You can see the right of way is much, it widens out, or it widens out to accommodate the 2-lane boulevards. This Hogan Industrial Park's been there for a long time, and the city obviously didn't require sidewalks when that industrial development built.
So it's 950 West that's south of it.
Well, you got 950 North
And
950 West.
But, okay. So there is no current sidewalk on the Hogan property or anything on 950 West
Correct,
or down on 950 North.
correct.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I'll jump in on this one. I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend approval of the PDO amendment for the property located at approximately 1030 North, 950 West, with the conditions noted in the staff report, with the suggested reasons for the action, with one change. And that is that to number 3, the developer shall construct the picnic area as per the submitted drawings, and to add either an awning or a pergola or other reasonably consistent shade structure as approved by staff.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debates? Okay, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Quickly, do we feel like that is clear enough? I mean, I know we've talked with the applicant. Do we feel like
It may not be, because I'm just making it up on the fly. If we want to fine tune it, I would welcome some suggestions.
Well, and Corey also talked about the possibility, and it seemed like the applicant was amenable to the fact that we could do a more formalized landscaping. Would people feel like that would sort of equal the trade-offs here? Is not just like an awning and then call it good, but if the applicant is like, well, we wanted to do more landscaping, and Corey's like, well, we could do more landscaping, except if we don't say anything about them doing more formalized landscaping and instead just say, okay, go forward, that we might be missing that opportunity to have them do that.
Bear questions. Maybe I'm too risk averse, but as you start to mess with things closer and closer to wetlands, you get more and more problems possibly. But I'm no expert. And so because I don't know what I don't know, I didn't want to go there. I didn't feel like I was equipped to make that kind of recommendation.
Would anyone feel comfortable with us adding, maybe instead of 3, saying just specifically an awning, or you said awning, or what did you say?
A pergola.
Pergola. If we said something to the effect that gave staff a little bit more latitude to helping either that or staff working with the applicant to somehow reassess the landscaping to elevate it or something like that. I don't know. Maybe Lisa's like, don't say something like that. I don't know. What do you guys think about something that gives them a little bit more flexibility like they kind of requested?
Well, Lisa can weigh in on the legality. I would just, I would add in, if you're going to be amenable to landscaping, that you just define the parameter near and around the picnic area, or we have to have the debate, does the rest of the northern property change also?
Yeah.
And then you have to amend the site plan. If you're going to amend the landscaping, you have to amend the site plan. But my experience with this applicant, I think you need to be very specific. I think the condition that Commissioner Kerr has provided is specific enough, because it says, some sort of shade structure. I didn't get if he said specifically around the picnic area. That would be the only thing I would add, is that, yeah, we want a shade structure around the picnic area and increase landscaping around the picnic area. I do agree with some concerns about a vague condition for staff to work with this applicant on some major landscaping amendments. I think they just need to bring those forward if they want those as a site plan amendment.
Okay, that's helpful, Lisa. Thank you. So Mason, would you be open to an amendment to your motion? I guess I can make an amendment. I guess I can move to make an amendment that is to add to number 3 that says specifically the shade structure would be specifically around the picnic area, which Lisa suggested, so it's a little bit more specific. And then in addition to that, saying, and Lisa said it beautifully, and improved landscaping around that same area. Mason, you're so good with words. Why don't you help me here?
Okay, so let's try this from scratch, if that's okay.
Perfect.
So the way that I would ask for my motion to be phrased is all of the proposed action and reasonings as in the staff report. And then under 3, the developer shall construct the picnic area as per the submitted drawings, with the amendment that a shade structure, for example, an awning or a pergola, be situated either on the picnic area or very close thereto, to allow the picnickers to enjoy that shade. And then some improved landscaping features in and around just the picnic area, and that all of the foregoing could be approved by staff.
I like that.
Who previously seconded Mason's motion?
Me.
That was Kevin. Kevin, do you still second the motion as restated?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
So we still only have now original, I'm going to call it, because I'm chair and I get to do what I want, apparently. That's the motion on the table. Any further discussion on this motion? No, okay, if not, we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote. Commissioner Wright.
I don't love it, but I'm going to say aye.
Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Commissioner Summerhays.
Aye.
Commissioner Wilcox.
Aye.
Commissioner Kerr.
I don't love it, but I'm going to say aye.
I'm an aye as well. Okay, thank you guys. Healthy debate on that one. Next up on our agenda, we have item number 3. We have another legislative decision. This one is the Grazie rezone from agricultural low to residential low. And so we'll turn the time over to staff.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so this is the zoning map for the area. And I've pronounced it Grazie. I've heard Grazie and Grazie. So I'm not sure. The applicant can clarify the pronunciation of the rezone request. But as you can see, 1441 is zoned agricultural low. It does have an existing house and a garage area. It's, I believe, just about an acre in size. And they would like to rezone it to residential low. And even though it's not related now, they're looking to divide the lot somehow in the future, and they'll decide how they want to do that. But for now, they would just like to rezone this property to residential low. And you can see as you zoom out, we have islands and peninsulas of agricultural low zoning. So you'll be looking at the general plan, first of all, to consider this rezone. This is in the northwest neighborhood, so the division line is here at Main Street. And the northwest neighborhood's general plan basically states that the city was not going to force zone residential low to all properties in the city. The overall plan for the northwest quadrant is to move to a residential low, which is roughly quarter-acre lot type development. However, in not forcing it, they were going to allow the owners of the individual agricultural pieces of property rezone it at their discretion, and that the general plan would consider the future for reasonable future development and provide those opportunities. And so I think this is a for example of what the general plan was really trying to do. We've had controversy about agricultural zoning to the north, where we have much larger agricultural land yet to be developed or rezoned. But this one probably is the idyllic situation. They left agricultural in place until the owners would like to change that. The applicants are now the new owners of the property. They would like to change it. And then, as I indicated, they will look at a possibility of doing a lot split. The other elements are just looking at the surrounding area and what kind of impact it potentially makes. As you can see, most of the area has transitioned to the RL zone. So we do feel it's consistent with the surrounding area. The impact that it would have to surrounding properties. The utilities are available in Main Street. I think I mentioned in the report, you're dealing with a UDOT road. I've talked to the applicants before. Cutting into a UDOT road can potentially have a higher price factor for development, but the utilities are available. The impact that staff would see is it is an isolated piece of AL that is not currently connected to a storm drain system. You probably have a sheet flow from the driveway out to Main Street, but the back of the property is probably contained in itself. And one of the impacts is stormwater management. We do have local and state laws now that are even more strict than we have it in the past. And so they will be required to manage that stormwater on the property. And you would likely see the on-site management at further subdivision development. You don't see that typically at rezone. So we've recommended approval at this point.
Thanks, Corey. Any questions for staff?
Yeah, Corey, real quickly, if I remember right, and I might not be right, the minimum frontage for an RL zone is 60 feet?
The minimum in frontage is 60 feet by base zoning.
Okay.
And the minimum for agricultural is 80.
Okay, and this one, if I read right, has 200 feet of frontage?
Yes.
All right, now that's one part of it, but I guess, are we doing this potentially in vain? You mentioned in the staff report about how you'd have to work with UDOT in order to get a curb cut for any type of development here. How likely is that to happen in your opinion? Does UDOT, I mean, because in our previous discussions, it sounds like UDOT hates curb cuts and they would like to eliminate as many of them as they can. So are we going to rezone this to residential low, but it's not going to matter because you'll still only ever have one cut here, which would really only allow one home?
Yeah, let me find it on here. Without the zoning map, it's harder for me to find. There it
Right
is.
there.
So you're right that UDOT likes to reduce curb cuts. We have 2 curb cuts, one for the garage and one for the home. I don't know how UDOT's policy affects, generally, they don't take away curb cuts that are existing. It's when you want to ask for new curb cuts. So as they divide I think the trick of the property is if they're going to divide the land, obviously if they want to preserve, I mean, you can tear down the house and we're probably at a little more neutrality of what's going on. But if they keep the house, the lot line is going to show up somewhere on the south side of the house, minimum setbacks 8 feet. And what I don't know about UDOT is how they would adjust that curb cut. Would they allow them to adjust it for another driveway located somewhere else? Will they make them keep it in place? And that's the part that's a big question to me, is if we demo the home, is UDOT going to allow them to adjust the curb cuts for a new lot arrangement? Or are they going to make them stay at the existing curb cuts? Common sense to me is that they'll work with them to locate the curb cuts in the best way so you don't have competing interests of traffic. But I'm just not familiar enough with UDOT on adjusting the existing curb cuts to a new lot layout.
No, that's fine, Corey. And I guess, the other point of it is if you go from, well, just the south side of the house driveway to kind of the south side of the garage driveway, it's more than 60 feet. But anyway, part of the reason why I wanted to bring that up was just to have that conversation, certainly so that, in case that conversation hasn't already been had with the applicant, that they're not surprised by roadblocks to potential future development thanks to UDOT, so that it's out there on the table and everybody's aware of it. So
that's a good point. Hopefully in our conversations we covered that. I thought we had, but we can always ask the applicant to make. You have a lot of conversations, so you don't know what they did hear, didn't hear, or remember.
But also, sorry, but I also think too, we're not UDOT, we're us, and we're just looking at what we're doing and what is appropriate zoning for our area. And I would be surprised if UDOT doesn't like to make curb cuts, but I would be surprised if they had real justification for not allowing a residential curb cut on their road. So yeah, that might be tricky to figure out exactly where that's going to go. That's not sort of in our thing that we have to deal with. And also I would assume that UDOT recognizes that there are lots of residential properties along this main street and would work with the applicant.
Before we get too far into discussion on this one, does anybody have any specific questions for staff? If not, we'll go ahead and we'll invite the applicant to join us via video or telephone. Fantastic. And gentlemen, are you both the applicants that have just joined us via video?
Yeah.
Yes, you'll just both introduce yourself for us for the record.
Yeah, I'm Eric DeFries, and we like to pronounce it Grazie. It's Italian.
And Grady Brimley, thanks for having us tonight.
Thanks, guys. My name is Shaylin, and it's spelled very weird, so I try really hard to be sensitive to names. Would you like to speak to this one?
I don't think we have much to add. Just to confirm, we are aware. Staff did tell us about the UDOT. We're waiting for this to move along that path. But our hope is that because there's already a curb cut there, that they'll be workable in a development. And it is our intention to potentially do exactly what Corey described, which is to split the lot to the south of the house so we could use that curb cut.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the applicants?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that was out on the table. And so, like I said before, nobody's surprised by anything that comes along, and that's fine. Just want to make sure we talked about it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks to you both. This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing. So we will take the opportunity to invite any member of the public who wishes to participate to either join us via video, or you are welcome to dial in at the number that's on the screen, which is being live streamed, 1-669-900-9128. And we'll go ahead and pause. And to the two applicants, you're welcome to go ahead and mute your video. Thanks to you both. I always feel like I should put on some kind of Jeopardy theme song music while we're waiting to see if people are going to participate. There's a lot of great benefit to doing things via technology, but this is one of those clunky things that is okay. Seeing no one appearing via video and seeing no one calling in, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any further discussion or debate on this one? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I got it. Sorry, it took me a minute to find it. I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend approval of the zone map amendment for the property located at 1441 North Main Street, known as parcel 02-015-0002, from agricultural low to residential low, with suggested reasons for action A and B in the staff report.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? If not, we'll take this in reverse order this time. Commissioner Kerr.
Aye.
Commissioner Wilcox.
Aye.
Commissioner Summerhays.
Aye.
Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Commissioner Wright.
Aye.
Commissioner Me is an aye as well. Thank you for the Grazie property. Okay. Commissioner Me. I just make stuff up, you know, it's
Grazie for the grazie.
Grazie. Okay.
Thank you. For
moving to the last item on our agenda. I shouldn't say the last item, the last substantive item. So we have a third legislative decision before us tonight. This involves a zoning text amendment for residential buffering. I expect this one is going to be a spirited debate, so I will turn the time over to staff.
Okay, hopefully you can see the screen. If you bear with me just for a second so that I can make sure I set the request up right. As you recall previously, this is a response from the City Council giving us a direction as a staff and a commission to consider the buffering landscaping requirements. And I think a lot of the impetus can be tied back to the Hive development where we have a multifamily adjacent to a single family zone. And there was not an established automatic buffer associated with the residential medium and the residential high zones like we do have with the commercial. One of the things to kind of step back to make sure that I clearly represent the City Council. The City Council also included roughly in their direction that this project could be tied to the South Main Street plan. And because the South Main Street plan had some commercial and some adjacent to residential, some single family, and said, you know, you can couple those together and kind of study those of them together. As you know, we've kind of put the South Main Street plan a little bit on the back burner and are moving forward with our transportation element that'll come to you at your next meeting to begin that process. And I felt like we didn't have to hitch the residential buffer directly to the South Main Street plan. Even though we have some residential against the commercial, we kind of address already commercial development and its obligation to buffer itself, either as new development or if they significantly alter the development, they have to bring it up to the current codes. And we do have buffering for the current code. So if you look at the current code buffer, if you're a commercial medium zone, you'll be required to buffer, And you see the strikeout, you're required to buffer at 15 feet. And if you are a high and a very high commercial zone, you're required to buffer at 30 feet. So they went a 15 and a 30 between the two types of commercial intensities. So as we're looking at buffering, rather than try to create a complex weave in the residential standards, it seemed easier enough to just go back to the landscaping standards, because when you read the residential table, it references the landscape section of the code. So if there's anything applicable in the landscape section of that code, you have to do it. Well, primarily that's when you're doing planned development type of developments. There's the non-single family residential. You have to do certain trees and landscaping amounts and common area amounts in the landscaping ordinance, but there is no buffer in the landscaping ordinance for these zones. And so it seemed to me a logical place is to use the reference and plug in buffering along with the commercial buffering. So that's why I think we can kind of separate it out and maybe have a little bit of discussion about commercial buffering, knowing that we have residential and commercial adjacent to single family. So that's a long way of clarifying, but here's the proposal. Modify the language so that we add residential buffering into our landscape chapter. And then the discussion should center around, well, this is what we do with commercial. So we start out that medium zones are 15 feet and high and very high are 30 feet. There's no other labeling. They lump some high and very high to the 30 feet. And so what should we do with the residential buffer depth for itself? So this is my thought pattern. Residential medium intensity zones just use the 20-foot setback for rear yards. So whether you're facing side of building to a single family zone, whether you're the front of it, whether the rear of it, let's just use, if you have a 20-foot setback in a single family zone, we have a 20-foot setback for a multi-family zone at medium, and just use that. So that's something to debate. Is that okay? Why that's important for debate is I'm a little concerned that if we buffer the setback of 20 feet for residential development, why are we so lenient with commercial development? And so I think that's a debate. Should we also change the commercial to 20 feet? But here's the hitch to it. Our commercial medium are small parcels. They're very small parcels. If you add another 5 feet to it, that has some impact to these small parcels. Is that good or bad? Well, it just depends on, like for an example, the old 7-Eleven, now you have the Cup Bop in there. You know, if you add into that, how do you tear down that building at a certain point and move it so that it meets this buffer? But again, you have the same problem. How do you move it if it's 15? So I just want to point out that if we're going to look at residential to buffer to single family and reuse the rear yard setback of 20 feet, should we be changing the medium zone to residential to 20 feet rather than 15? The other thing I think you could discuss about is we do not split out high and very high in commercial. We lump it in to 30 feet. And so my proposal shows that, well, we don't have a residential very high. Now I know people would like to say 12 units an acre is very high, but we label it as high. So we don't have a residential very high zone. So here we are playing with it. Are we going to lump it in with the commercial high and say you have to go 30 feet? And I think there's some arguments of 30 feet. If you're developing something residential or residential high, you know, you're looking at 12 units an acre, you're looking at large buildings, and you're not looking at the smaller buildings. And so 30 feet seems to be something that, yeah, if we're going to have some very large buildings, maybe a rear yard setback is not enough. 30 feet maybe is okay. But what, by way of disclosure of the council again, they mentioned the term 25 feet. Maybe it should be 25 feet. So I think we need to have that discussion. Is it 25 feet for a high zone? Is it 30 feet for a high zone? 30 feet's a lot, because if you're looking at using your residential development and you're eating up the space for the 30-foot distance, they're going to put all of their required landscaping in that 30-foot zone. That's going to make up most of their landscaping. Because if you had like the Hive, if we put 30 feet, we lose a whole bunch of other area that could be landscaping, because we're putting it into that buffer, and they're going to have to shrink the development spacing closer together. The other argument that I've heard about the 30 feet, I don't know if I can give you the empirical data with it, but if multifamily is supposed to function for our hopeful moderate income housing, it's becoming more expensive to put in that much landscaping, put that much separation. I don't know if it empirically is a valid statement, but I've heard that you could be eating into the affordability in some manner. And so I'm now going to turn it over to you. Is it 20 feet? Should we be changing the 20 feet to the commercial? Is the high zone 25 feet, or is it 30 feet like we do with the commercial? Have at it. Tell me what you think.
Okay, so that we are doing this in an orderly fashion, let's start, and it has been noticed for a public hearing. Let's start first if there are any questions for staff about their staff report or what was just told to us. Then let's open it for the public hearing. Then let's go ahead and debate and discuss. So I'm going to start first by asking, are there any questions for staff?
I've got a question for staff, and I'll go into it later, but I want to hear what staff has to say. I think buffering is not just an issue of the actual horizontal setback. I think it's also a function of the vertical height of the building structure from zone to zone. So my question to staff is, what thoughts or what analysis was done on the staff level to contemplate or to consider the effect of height adjacent to or in connection with the horizontal setback from zone to zone?
That's a good question. And from my review of the ordinance, we don't look at buffering solely as a horizontal distance. If you look at, once you have to establish a buffer, here's your horizontal distance, but the next section talks about what has to happen inside of that horizontal distance. And we require, there's two options in that. There's one with a wall. So you have to put in a 6-foot wall, screening wall of some type. And you have to plant trees along that buffer. So if you look at a wall height and a tree height, even a decorative ornamental tree that's deciduous. Now, I got to give you the idea that the deciduous drops its leaves in the wintertime, but they can also use coniferous, which wouldn't drop its leaves, but they have to use a certain amount of trees for every, I think it's every 25 feet or something of that nature. You have to put in those trees. An ornamental tree is going to go to 25 feet. Our max height to the building is 30 feet. So between the wall, the tree requirement, and the distance, I think you handle the bulk look of the building. So that would be my current answer. Without getting into, now we go into measuring, because we've had this discussion when we amended the residential zones a number of years ago. Lisa's just mentioning it's one tree every 20 feet in that buffer. Thanks, Lisa. So that's a significant amount of trees that are in that buffer to buffer that large wall space. But if you remember, we had a significant discussion on whether we should do increased setbacks for accessory buildings in the residential. The city passed it for the agriculture or for the residential, did not pass it for the agricultural. Citizens came back later on the residential and balked at the height measurement requirements versus distance from property line. And the city council went back and removed that to the public. So
Corey, you're heading maybe down a road where, full disclosure to the commission, Corey and I got into quite a disagreement years ago. I've got what the equivalent of a 4,500 square foot home 2 feet off of my back property line because it's quote unquote an accessory building. I don't think anybody in the city, from a constituent standpoint, if they saw what they saw in my backyard, would agree that that's either meets a buffering requirement or otherwise. So I think that's, again, to my point as a commission, as we look at buffering requirements, I don't think we just rely on some landscape buffering to hopefully take care of an issue. I think we really need to nail it down, in addition to what may be a landscape requirement, have a discussion about heights in association with the horizontal setback.
Thanks. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, this matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to participate. We have no one else but us and staff participating via Zoom. So I'll pause for a moment to allow anyone who wishes to call in and participate via phone.
Yeah, if they're watching on YouTube, they're delayed by what, 5-7 seconds?
Yeah, we'll give it just a second. And while we're waiting, I'll just let everybody know my thinking on these public hearings. As long as the city council is continuing to meet remotely, I intend to have our commission meet remotely. And when the city council starts meeting in person, then we'll just follow lead. That's my current plan.
I like that idea.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and seeing no one dial in, we'll close the public hearing. Okay, now let's open this up for discussion and debate. And I would really like to see us explore this idea that Spencer has put forward, because I think that there are two different ways, or maybe more, to tackle this, vertical and horizontal. And I'm not sure that just forcing people to have setbacks is necessarily the best solution. But what do you guys think?
I was, interested obviously in vertical as well, but specifically in landscape as well, because I know that if you look at some of the properties that have caused concern for people, there's a vertical element that if someone has some sort of like a deck or something, that not only the setback could be close, but it could also just like peer all the way over into another area. So I think vertical is important. I think landscaping is important. And I think just the horizontal setback, I think they're all kind of part of it.
And Becky brings up a great point that I totally forgot about in the hive issue was, yeah, you may have a like kind setback, but you have some decks. Now, in the case of the hive development, you also had decks for those individuals already in the single family neighborhood. So I wasn't, if you can have a deck already in an existing single family, or let's say a RL zone, I have a hard time saying, why couldn't you have a deck in a similar type of fashion in the adjacent neighborhood? So
I guess the argument for that would be, if you have a single family, it would be like a 1-to-1 or maybe a 2-to-1, but with a high or residential high or whatever, people next to a residential low, you would have a lot more than just a 1-to-1 ratio of decks looking into your yard.
Yeah, and so maybe just food for thought I don't know that this is the right answer, but to kind of get geometric or architectural on for the commission would be, is there a way where we can draw a 45-degree angle from the highest point of an adjacent zone downward to the adjacent property line, and essentially that becomes your setback line? Is there danger in doing that?
I feel like deja vu.
Okay,
Didn't we
well,
have-
We did that. We did that.
Like setbacks, that's what we proposed, right? That's what we recommended to the city council.
Yeah.
Yeah, Logan busted out the Sokotoa and we ran down that road.
and was it rejected by the council?
Ultimately, it was.
I think that's what Corey was saying, is that maybe they accepted it. You can give us, Corey, tell us what you said. They accepted it and then the citizens came back and said something about it, or what?
No, the matrix measurement was rejected by both the commission and the council. And you relied only on a setback distance. And we discussed whether it would be 8 feet for certain sizes, 5 feet for certain sizes, and 3 feet for certain sizes. The 45-degree schematic and the height measurement was rejected by both bodies.
That doesn't mean we can't resubmit it to the council though, right? We could
You can come up with it again if you'd like to try, yeah.
Spencer's gonna take a run at it. Go, Spencer.
Well,
Take a run at it.
Well, to my point, I would hate to think that anybody else in the city would have to go through what is in my backyard. Mason can attest as a neighbor of mine. So I would broaden the scope, not just within what's contemplated in the staff notes here, but to include any zone, or any structure within a zone. So for example, an accessory building, if you're going to build it close to the property line, that's fine, but it can't be a certain height. You got to have this 45-degree angle off of the highest point. And I think that might satisfy, let
me give you
all zones.
Yeah, let me give you kind of a separation of that, because I don't disagree in principle with what you're talking about, but I think that's very, very different than buffering between zones. So I think you can tackle it 2 parts. I would not want the buffering to be handcuffed by a future discussion about accessory buildings, zone wides and so forth. Just so you know, the situation that you experienced, Commissioner Summerhays, was dealing with setbacks within the district itself. We're dealing with buffering, and when you're dealing with buffering, it's much more restrictive. There's nothing that goes in that buffer except for landscaping in that wall. So there's no accessory buildings allowed in there. There's no primary buildings allowed in there. And so I think that's a little bit different discussion, because the building that you're referencing is 6 feet off the property line. It doesn't even have the minimum 20-foot buffer or 15-foot buffer or so forth. And if that buffer was, because they're both the same, they're not the same zone, but they're considered low density. And so they're not considered separate zones. And so each zone has a problem with accessory buildings getting close to the property lines.
So is there a difference between buffering and setbacks then? I guess I'm confusing 2 terminologies, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the buffer itself is what's happening between different types of zones. And that basically it's an increased intensity. So single family zones in Centerville are both agricultural low and RL. By our ordinance, they're the same zone. It's when you want to come into a residential medium zone against an AL and an RL, what's that buffer versus what's the control of the setbacks of the structures. And so I'm not disagreeing with your point on the setback issues. I'm just saying the buffer is holistically a different animal.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for making that clarification, because I'm obviously confusing the 2.
Well, and we haven't noticed the setbacks, and I think broadening it or talking about that issue is important, but we haven't noticed it for public comment. So I think and Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember when I'm always like, let's talk more about this. I want to talk about this. She's like, wait a minute, we have to talk about what we've actually noticed so people know what we're discussing. So,
well, and I think the reason that we kind of got off on this tangent is because Corey, in looking at how to create this buffer zone, was borrowing essentially from the setbacks, right? Which I think makes, I understand where you're coming from on that, Corey. Let me throw this out here, because when I think about buffering and I think about the different zones that we have in the city, typically we have these different zones because naturally we want to buffer residential low from very high commercial, right? Kind of to take the two extremes. And a lot of times as we're looking at these plans, the goal is to transition from residential low to residential medium to residential high to something else, right? And so when we're thinking about that, that's already sort of in a way a natural buffer. The idea that if we are stacking our zoning the way that I envision that it's supposed to work, you're not going to be sticking two incongruous uses together. And so for me, I feel a lot more strongly about trying to put a buffer in between, say, a residential low abutting a residential high than I do a residential low abutting a residential medium, because I think that that's already, the zoning itself is already sort of taking that into account. Does that make sense? And the way that Corey has drafted this language, I'm not sure that that comes across here.
I agree with you, Shaylin. I mean, that's from what my limited experience is on this commission, that's the goal, is to have that sort of natural buffering. And when there is that incongruency, that's where there's lots of tension that comes up with the public. However, I will say that even in between residential low and residential medium, we have seen some significant tension and feedback in the city. So I don't know that, even though theoretically and in practice it's going to be a little bit different. I think theoretically I agree with you, but I just think in practice we've seen that people get a little bit worked up even at the medium level, the residential medium level.
And I'm not necessarily saying that I'm against buffering even between, say, a residential low and a residential medium. What I am suggesting is should we distinguish between those? Meaning, should we have a smaller buffer requirement between two immediately adjacent properties and make a larger buffer requirement if we do have, say, a residential low abutting a residential high, right? And tease that out a little bit more.
I would like to see that. I think that's a great idea.
Corey, I have a question for you. So we've talked before at length about commercial development, commercial, I guess, remodeling, right? And if you change the building footprint by 30%, then you're subject to all sorts of other things. First, specifically, we talked about this with Main Street ad nauseum. Does that same 30% rule, or is there a similar rule that applies to residential remodeling? If somebody wants to add a big family room on the back of their house that happens to be pretty large, are they subject to some of that type of requirement? And then therefore, could they potentially be subject to some of this buffering if they happen to be abutting up against a different zone?
I don't think you have the problem with the single family per se. You could have a single family violate a setback and be subject to the same nonconformities issue, but you also have the issue that the landscaping competes with a nonconforming structure, and a nonconforming structure supersedes the issue of the landscaping automatically. So there's some inability, even if you increase the size, there's inability to get all of your landscaping requirements. You're just trying to bring them up to the extent possible. But I do think that, for an example, would be, I don't think it's a good example.
Well, let me give you an example then, Corey. So maybe an older home that was built long before well-established setback requirements, Older homes tend to be smaller as well. So somebody decides they want to expand their older home and they've got a side yard that happens to be a different type of a zone or something like that. If they want to expand their home, are they going to have to move their house or try and buy space to get that buffering in?
Well, that's the assumption that the home is built in some type of higher intensity zone.
Yeah.
The most assumption is that most of your single family homes are always going to be the lower intensity, and it's only the higher intensity that's obligated to fix itself.
Yeah, but we've got a decent amount of higher intensity or medium zones in the old town site area that might fall into that.
Most of all that's been eliminated. It would be the old town the old town eliminated the duplex zoning of the past, and you had to register your multifamily unit in Old Town before a certain date. It's called conservation of uses. And if you didn't register it, then you lost your non-conforming right. So
I guess the only medium intensity there is what's left along Parish Lane.
Yeah.
On the north end of the old town site.
Kevin, because if somebody in a single family, just a regular RL zone has a small home, wants to say demo and do a new home, they're still going to have a 20-foot setback. Right? Which is the minimum setback anyway. So I guess your point is, well, what if they're in a medium zone? Then they would be subject to a 25-foot setback as opposed to the 20. Is that
yeah? So a demo is one thing, and I'm totally fine with a demo. Like if you're going to wipe it out and start over, then sure, you have a clean slate to do what you want. But if you're not going to do a full demo, if you've already got your house and it just happens to be non-conforming, but does that prohibit you then from doing certain modifications or remodels to your existing home?
Let's just take right there along just east of the Papa Murphy's, and you got a couple of homes that are in multifamily. If they wanted to, let's just say their rear yard setback is 15 existing, and we adopt a 20 just by theoretical discussion, they would not be able to expand further to the south because they've maximized, they're non-conforming. They just can't increase that degree of nonconformity. But that would not apply to expanding upwards if they have the height allowance to do it, or expanding to the side setbacks if they have room to do it, or to the front setbacks if there's room to do it. It would just inhibit the expansion to increase the degree of nonconformity.
So yeah, that's a good point, but let's talk about, I think I found a good example for this, and maybe this is the only place in the whole city, who knows? But at one point we had a lot of discussions here about I can't even remember what it was called. It was the little home on 4th East, right there on Parish, or just around the corner from Parish Lane. There was a sewer line issue that was there. The plan was to put in essentially a flag lot and do a development in the backyard. That home is residential medium, that's zoned residential medium, and the property just to the south of it is zoned residential low. So, and the home is pretty close to the side yard. Looks like there's a car right there, so it looks like it's probably only about 8 or 10 feet away from the side yard.
Your screen.
Oh yeah, good point. I can do that. Hey, thank you. Let's see. Let's do this one. Okay. Let me back up so everybody can orient themselves. So, Parish Lane, 4th East. This home here, I'm talking about this one right here. This is zoned residential medium. This is residential low. Pretty tight right here along that property line, the south edge of the property is pretty close, or south edge of the home is pretty close to the property. Now, my main concern here, Corey, is let's say that this homeowner wanted to remodel out to the north or out to the west. By doing so, does that subject them now to bring this into conformity, that south edge there into conformity, because the neighboring zone is a different intensity, a lower intensity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. One thing our code does is if it was built in accordance with what was approved with the city, it's considered conforming. So the only thing now to increase it is if they wanted, so example to going to the east there, is that to the east, right? I don't think that would be, if this is single family, then they would be limited to wherever they abut that single family to that. So they have room to expand. It's this backyard area that may be problematic. And there is a procedure in the Board of Adjustment to expand a non-conforming building if they meet certain criteria. So even though we might have that buffer there, they could be allowed to expand
north or west.
Yeah. So the example would be where the Board of Adjustment would play is, let's say it's a single family home and they were increasing that degree, they can go to the Board of Adjustment and maintain that setback. But I could see where it violates one of it if they try to convert that into a triplex. It would, so the board has some discretionary power to say, how does it affect the neighbors? And are we generally complying with the spirit and intent of the plan?
So Corey, if I hear you right, then, and tell me if I'm wrong, but if I hear you right, what you're saying is that, yeah, they would technically be required to comply with these buffering requirements that we're talking about here, but there is a mechanism for them to get an exception through the Board of Adjustments. Okay. Sorry for hijacking the meeting for a while. I just wanted to really understand how making these changes might affect existing properties and potential development to existing properties.
Now, I do have to give the Board of Adjustment caveat. They've got to make those findings, but you can expand a non-conforming structure without upgrading the landscaping, but you are required, for an example of a commercial, to upgrade to the minimum amount of parking per code. So it doesn't get you out of parking, but it can get you out of landscaping and that buffering requirement.
Let me throw out one other idea, just to kind of to chew on. So Corey, you mentioned we need to be careful as we're thinking through this issue, because if we tell people that you have to have a 30-foot setback, we could be getting developments that we don't really want, right? If that's the way that we choose to go. And so because the developers will feel constrained, well, okay, fine, I'll give you my 30-foot setback, but then you're not going to get other things over here that you want. What about the possibility of saying, look, you can do 30 feet, or if you don't want to do the full 30 feet, we can cut off some of that and make it smaller if you insert a vertical element, meaning like a 6-foot wall, or I personally like a tree buffer, because as I think about it, and I don't know, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Spencer. If somebody was going to be building a structure close to my backyard, I think that having a tree screen, something that was going to be pretty tall that kind of blocked out a lot of that building, might ameliorate some of my concern about them being so close to my property line if I felt like I still had some privacy.
Yeah, and so I'm just gonna make the correction again. We're talking about buffers, not setbacks.
Well, no, I know, but Corey has taken the 20-foot setback as a buffer zone, and so I'm thinking horizontal and vertical, and can we kind of shift it depending on, to give the developer a little bit more freedom to get a better result.
Right. So I'm just looking at the suggested language, and I'm going to take a crack at this to get more specific. So you got sections 1 and 2, commercial section 1 on their minimum buffer depths, in section 2. Here's my feeling. Corey, the residential low buffer is 20 feet. Is that correct?
Well, there is no buffer in the residential low. It's now just
So
controlled.
the setback reigns in residential low?
Yes.
Okay. So here's my suggestion. Let me take paragraph number 2, B2, stab at that first. If the residential low is already at 20 feet, may I suggest we go to 25 on residential medium and 30 on the high. So it goes, it ramps up from 20, 25, 30. And then on the commercial, if we go to the commercial, sorry, I'm going to pull up my own screen here because I'm just going to go back to the PDF. So on the commercial, I kind of feel the same way that medium commercial, maybe 25 and 30, but there's an overall caveat to that. And I'm going to go back to what I kind of feel from an architectural and spatial understanding, that there is this some kind of 45-degree angle from the highest outside point of a structure downwards to the property line that is also a back check. So it's the lesser of, let's say. So there is some flexibility for a developer to actually minimize that setback if they go lower in terms of height. So it's the lesser of that footage or the setback, but no less than.
Or what if you did the 45-degree angle from the top point of the structure to the top point of a vertical buffer?
So that's tricky, because what if somebody decides to really make a tall fence to get around that? I think there's some.
Well, we do have limits on fence heights. That's a thing.
Yeah. So if you do that, Kevin, you're gonna. I mean, if it's a 45-degree angle, you're gonna. If you have a 6-foot fence, you're knocking off 6 feet off of your buffer requirement. And I don't think that's what we're trying to accomplish. For reference on some of our other developments where people have gotten pretty animated.
So let me give you 2 points to answer and then a clarifying question, Spencer, of your suggestion. The first one is going back to Shaylin. Shaylin, the answer is that you can put in elements in your landscape buffer. So an example is you have a landscape buffer that can allow vegetation sufficient to function as a fence or a fence, plus and then those at least a tree minimum every 20 feet. So you can parse out a little bit of difference, but let me tell you the downside of that. If it's a 30-foot buffer, so that's small, you're kind of dealing with the same thing. It's either shrubs and bushes that are a fence or a fence. You pick and choose. When you start doing the lateral distance of it and say, okay, the base requirement's 30 feet, but let's just, for example, I'll give you a reduction of 20 feet if you do an 8-foot wall instead of a 6-foot wall. What you will ultimately get is everybody will default to the 25 feet and do the wall most likely. So you're kind of setting up the standards 30 feet to protect you, but they will almost always choose the easier of two weevils, as they say of Master and Commander.
I guess the question is that a bad thing? Right? Is it really the lesser of two evils if putting in that vertical element sufficiently ameliorates the concern from the other property owner? Because if the answer is that a vertical element adequately addresses the problem, then we don't need the larger setback. Then that vertical element is fine, and that's what
your vertical element is already at X. So you'd have to establish a more aggressive vertical elements. You're already at 6 feet for some type of screen. You're already at trees every 20 feet.
Yeah.
So, what's the addition more that you're required to do in order to do that? And I think they will just automatically default to whatever that is, particularly if it's much easier. And then the public says, well, why didn't I get my 30 feet?
And I will say, to back up what Corey's saying, Shaylin, is if you have a 6-foot fence and now you've changed your buffer from 30 feet to 24 feet, it's not going to make somebody more happy just because they have a 6-foot fence. They'll actually be closer and looking into their backyard from a closer distance than otherwise. So a 6-foot fence isn't going to help, I think, what we're trying to accomplish in terms of buffering.
And I don't think an 8-foot fence does the same thing. And now you're starting to deal with heights and structures that can be blown over in the winds.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I've never been a fan of a tall fence. I mean, I you guys know I push back pretty hard on that. I'm I'm all 6 foot. I'm team 6 foot fence citywide on that piece.
Same.
Corey, you had a clarifying question for me?
Yeah, I understand the principle of you're talking about the 45. I just want a clarity. Is the 45 measured in the new development compared to a 45 of existing development?
Maybe I don't understand the question.
Okay, I'll rephrase that. So let's say that in this, for example, would be is that I'm dealing with a single family zone, and this is what's come up. That's why I'm using it. Almost the entire neighborhood is 1-story levels. So if we drive that and say, okay, new development, your buffer is established off of this matrix based on that your neighboring property's existing pattern is 1-level story houses. Let's just say that's built off of that.
Yeah.
That sounds good until the new development puts it in at that ratio. But now the existing development can move from a 1-level to a 2-level because the zoning allows it to be a 2-level. You've just penalized the new development against the neighboring existing development.
Except that the new development in your example is an RL, it's an RL zone, correct?
And it allows a 30-foot height, 35-foot height,
Correct.
just like the medium and height.
In my mind, when you're putting, say it's an older neighborhood with 1-story homes and you have a new residential development that goes in that decides they want to do 2-story homes, both zones allow them to do that. So I have a hard time saying, well, you're new, so you've got to do a 1-story home, or you got to create a bigger buffer around your new development.
So you're just
If
measuring.
somebody chose to do a 1-story home, because you could have that in a new development too. You could have somebody decide, I want a 1-story home, and you could have somebody else decide, I want a 2-story home, and they're in the same new development. So
Right.
I don't have
And that's why I think the ratio breaks down, because.
well, that's why I said the lesser of.
Yeah, but I think when you start trying to put the matrix in, when all zones can be 35 feet, now your architectural measurements are varied about what your neighbor's doing, which is inconsistent with zoning, because zoning is saying, if you're in this zone, you get to do this. If you're in that zone, you get to do this. And so I would just say the 45 is going to be measured on its influence from where it's set at the buffer to where the property lines exist, and not taking into account existing development. Meaning we just have to live with this zone is comfortable being at 25 feet or 35 feet, or a matrix that everybody measures against the exact same, and we get the exact same results every time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did I make that more too complicated?
No, it's other jurisdictions use. You're very aware that for example, in Park City, they will use that matrix to make sure a roof does not go above a ridge line. So you get this height, but your height must not penetrate that ridge line. So if you're low on the foothill of that ridge, you're good as golden, and you can get a lot of latitude. But as you approach a home up to the ridge line, in Park City and Summit County do not want that roof penetrating above that roof line to do that vista. They will use that matrix you're talking about to ensure that it doesn't protrude above the ridge line.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at saying where I am on this one, because up until now, we've required buffering between commercial and residential. I think based on the understanding that commercial uses are very different than residential uses, and that we want there to be some type of a buffer so that the residences aren't intruded upon by the commercial uses that are adjacent to it. Makes total sense to me. Up until now, though, we haven't required buffering between the different types of residential. And I think that's because generally we recognize that residential is characteristically largely the same. And again, the intent of the city is to sort of slowly filter through those ranges of residential low, residential medium, residential high, and that was going to create some type of a more natural, progressive buffer. And I am concerned with the idea of chopping up, like the way that this has been proposed, it's treating residential low to residential medium as if I were residential low next to a commercial medium zone. I'm requiring a 6-foot fence. I'm requiring trees every 20 feet, right? And now I'm chopping up my city residentially into different, like very visual, different types of zones. And I'm not sure that that's what we want as a city. And so when I read the proposal, I think I would be completely comfortable applying this to residential zones that are more than 1 degree of separation, right? So if I have a residential low abutting a residential high, that's 2 degrees of separation. Let's get some good buffer in between them. But as between residential low and residential medium, I'm not sure we need this level of extreme buffering. And maybe I could be persuaded to do something a little bit less or something different, but I don't think that we should treat it as a one-size-fits-all type of solution. So that's where I'm thinking.
That extra 5 feet from 20 to 25 is extreme. You're more comfortable just leaving it at 20 between residential low and residential medium?
Yeah, I think I am. I think I'm comfortable leaving it at 20 feet. Now, I could be persuaded if people felt really, really strongly about it. I'm not sure that it's necessary. And the more requirements that we're imposing on our property owners, the harder it is for them to develop their property. And I just want to make sure that if we are restricting property owner rights, that we're doing it in a thoughtful, deliberative way. And so I think I am comfortable with the 20 between residential low and medium. Yeah.
So I'll jump in here just to say that this conversation highlights the eternal tension in land use. There's no great solution here, at least the way I see it. Lots of cities have done things differently. We had this conversation last year in Layton when the temple came in and didn't conform to proposed heights. So we did a step back amendment to our ordinance, and we have landscape buffering in the ordinance. I don't necessarily think Layton's ordinance would translate well to Centerville, but it's far more robust, but that also means it's far more complex. So those ordinances address these same questions, but they also create their own new problems. And I think, Shaylin, you've identified that with greater tailoring comes greater complexity, but with simplicity, I guess there's this chance for it doesn't fit everything like it ought to.
So I think that's a great point, Mason, and that was something I kind of wanted to bring up. It's interesting, my mother-in-law just recently moved from South Jordan, and their lot had agricultural rights, but it was in a residential neighborhood with an overlay. So it literally had like all these different things. And it wasn't, so they said that an agricultural lot could be split if it has a certain acreage, but then there was this overlay that required basically just a tiny bit more for each thing to be different. So yeah, it was pretty complex. And she was looking at like the opportunity of like splitting the lot as she was selling it, or what they were going to do. And I at first was like, wow, this is so restrictive. This is a very restrictive code because she's got a lot of property. It has horse property and they can't do it. But then I realized that the purpose of what they were doing is sort of similar to our Main Street overlay, where they've identified an area of the city where they want it to feel like horse property type of area. And so, yes, you can still do certain things, but the feel of it had this that what they were going for, that feeling in that area had that overlay that required it to do certain things. So that's all long to say that maybe we don't have a one size fits all. Maybe it's not just between these properties based on zoning, but maybe it's based on zoning in certain areas of our city. I don't know if that's too complex and if people really want to deal with that, but perhaps it's not, maybe it is more like a simple one size fits all, depending on the area of our city, or maybe it's a little bit more like we have an overlay or we have a certain something else that we add.
So I think we need to talk more about kind of that vertical sight line type of a thing. And my feeling is that's more of what has driven this type of conversation, is this idea of you have a deck or a balcony looking straight into somebody's backyard. If you had a residential high next to a residential low, but the residential high happened to be, single story height, I don't think anybody would care. Nobody would care because nobody's looking into your backyard. But when you start now to get height looking into your backyard, that's when people get kind of upset. And so I'd rather, instead of worrying about these buffering distances horizontally, I'd rather look more at that vertical side of things to eliminate that sight line into the backyard.
Although, let me play devil's advocate, Kevin, because we can have that same tension with a residential low abutting a residential low, right? We have residences that were built with Rambler style homes. And then I have the guy behind me decides to flatten his house and throw in a really high 2-story. And now he's got a balcony looking out over my backyard. And I'm right into that same situation, the very same situation that you've described, except that this can absolutely happen between two abutting residential low properties. And if that can happen, if it can and it does happen between two residential lows, then what are we really trying to address, right? Is it really that different between a residential low abutting a residential medium and a residential low abutting a residential low? Because we are going to continue to see change in our city. People are going to knock down buildings. They're going to build taller buildings. They're going to build 2-story buildings. We're going to have this tension.
Yes.
Well, that even happened, Shaylin, when we were looking at the property that was on a hill. There was a house that was actually, that was one of the things that we got kind of sidetracked on with the SOHCAHTOA hypotenuse 45 degree, is that there was a house that had a retaining wall, and a house that was below it, same zone, and pretty much doesn't matter if this house up here is a 2-story or 1-story, based on the angle of the street and the land, they're going to see everything in that backyard. So,
and I think what that does is it highlights that no matter what we do, there is always going to be a situation where whatever it is that we pass is going to make somebody unhappy. There is always going to be a circumstance where you can pull it up and go, wow, that doesn't make sense. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Those are all very good points. And I think maybe then, I'd be okay with going back to the city council and saying, look, we've talked about this. We've spent an hour discussing it and reviewing it. And, there's really not a good way to fix this for everybody. And it potentially creates other issues. And you're always going to have this problem one way or another. So we recommend just leave it alone. I'd be okay with that, but
Well, let me stir the pot like a planner does. One of the mentions at the city council, and I think this goes to Spencer and Kevin and others have mentioned it, about the deck. I think Becky's mentioned it about decks looking in the backyard. One difference that I do agree with, as in a multifamily zone versus a single family zone, is the matter of number of units that you have in a project. So an example is if you're in an agricultural on a half-acre lot, and by some chance you are in a residential high behind you, the number of balconies and the size of the buildings peering into your backyard, and again, I can argue with myself here, because the house built above the hill peering in my backyard. I mean, I can argue with myself, but I do agree that you have more number of units in a multifamily that have visual access to your backyard. And I think that is a driver. I want to acknowledge that is a driver.
And that's why, Corey, I say I am fully supportive of what you've prepared. If we're talking about two zones of separation, right? A residential low to a residential high, absolutely. I absolutely think that we should be looking at solid buffers because I think that those are two very different types of uses. I'm not quite convinced that we should be applying that same level of regulation on a residential low to a residential medium.
Right. And just so you know, I can use Dave Bell's property and get to Kevin Bacon really easy.
I was trying to figure out a way to say it, and it seemed like the best way to do it, right? Degrees of separation. So
Hey, because balconies don't count as part of the structure on buffering. Is that correct, Corey?
There's a little subtle difference. As your balcony is part of the main structure, the answer would be no, it doesn't count as part of the buffer. But we do have an extension when somebody does a deck beyond the main building. If it's 30 inches above grade now, then it counts towards the requirement to meet the 20-foot setback on the rear yard.
So let's go to the Hive. Those balconies then weren't really 25 or 20 feet back from the back property lines, if that's the case, because those balconies would have been 30 inches higher than the ground. So they actually would have, if we're applying this concept to the Hive, they would have had to increase the setback. Is that, or the buffer, is that correct?
Because we didn't have the buffering, their setback was only required to be, what was it? I don't remember, 10, and they went to 15.
Right, but my point is it would have been measured off of the balcony and not the structure.
Well, the balcony was integrated as part of the structure.
But I thought you just said that if it's integrated as part of the structure, it starts from the balcony, not the structure.
Right, but the balcony matched the main wall of the structure, so it didn't protrude out.
I thought
They had dividers.
They had dividers between the units. I can check
No,
on
not between units. I'm talking about between them and the northerly properties.
Right,
yeah,
but
the
there were
balcony would have
dividers
had to
between
meet the
units.
setback.
Okay, the balcony. So to Shaylin's point, which I wholeheartedly agree with, maybe the buffering discussion has to contemplate any balconies, decks, and maybe it already does. Or does it already, Corey?
Yes, the idea is that buffer is established as a minimum to all items. That buffer has to apply to parking lots, structures, accessory buildings, sports courts, swimming pools. That buffer is a mandatory buffer if you use the buffering definition.
Okay.
how are we all feeling about this one now? Anyone else wanna wade in?
Come on, Mason.
I mean, okay, so I don't think what's on the table today is ready. But I just don't know if what we could do is going to be any better. We're going to create problems as we solve problems. So I think if we're going to do something about this, we need to come up with what we as a planning commission feel is more important than the other. And by that, I'm referring to, do we want simplicity and ease of application, or do we want tailorability and we're willing to live with the complexity? And if we can find that balance, which is really hard, we then have to map that onto the city council because they're the ultimate decider. So it feels a little bit like four-dimensional chess, and any move we make, it just seems like sixes or half, it's either sixes or half a dozen. Call it what you want. We're just going to be solving problems and creating problems. And that's not to say we shouldn't try, but I wish that we could achieve clarity here with ourselves, but then also with the city council to determine how we want to govern here in Centerville. I can say just from my experience in what they decided in Layton, they wanted complexity. And that's what they use. They use a matrix on top of a matrix on top of a matrix, where they have a matrix for the zones, they have a matrix for the heights, they have a matrix for the buffers, and then they have additional footnotes for whether or not they want to do a tiered approach, whether they want to increase their setback and increase their height. But it works, and it's a different city. It's a completely different kind of city. So whether or not we want to look to that as a place where we can glean ideas, possibly, but maybe we don't. Part of this discussion then may not necessarily be getting into the nitty-gritty of a legislative action, but perhaps more of a decision about policy.
And I'm just going to go back, maybe I'm just being stubborn, but I think it's not too complex what I've proposed, going from 20, 25, 30. It's symmetrical. I'm just like, I guess I'm just OCD, and I love, just everything in its proper place. So 20, 25, 30 seems right to me. A 45-degree angle from the extended property. That just seems really simple to me. And it's better than what we have in place now.
So I agree with you, Mason. I think this is sometimes where I fall that causes everyone to have to listen to my comments and opinions. But what is the intent? What is the intent of what we're doing? And so if the intent is, I understand fully and wholeheartedly that what we're doing is recommending something to the city council. But I also believe that we have intention as a commission separate from the city council. So yes, we need to take into consideration those things that Corey has kind of directed us to help us understand. But let's talk about what is our intention. As a planning commission, our intention is, as Shaylin mentioned, to have sort of natural buffering that occurs within these zones. Our intention is to have not these disparate locations in the city that look so choppy and different. But then our intention is also to allow the residents to feel comfortable with change. That's part of our role, is to help and understand that we are saying yes to change a lot. And residents in our city, residents in any city, are going to be like, no, I don't want any change because I love it the way it is. But then they're going to be like, oh, I want to use my own place the way that I want to. So there's going to always be these competing goals. And then of course, we have to make it accessible for the property owner so that they will develop and that they will improve and help our city to become a good place and a better place, or make improvements. So I guess my intention is, or my comment is, what is our intention? And that intention is to have good planning in place. And I believe that it might be a little bit more complicated to make sure that we're kind of dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's to make sure that we are taking these things into consideration. That maybe we do look a little more closely on different areas like the historic district. How would the setbacks, because what's going to happen there? Well, let's think about it. There's going to be some redevelopment, and a little bit more probably in that historic district than maybe the area of the city that has homes that were built in 2000 and beyond or whatever. So I believe a one size fits all, even though we have a small little city, might create these kind of problems that we're looking at and unforeseeable problems. But if we kind of look at this and say, okay, what is this? How was this going to affect the different areas? Where might we see some of this redevelopment occur that would cause different zoning, residential zoning, to be near each other? And if that's going to be in a certain area of our city, maybe we address that for that area. I keep pushing that. No one's biting. I'm like, come on guys, like, don't you think that might be a good idea? But I think that we need to look at this intention and try to we can't foresee the future, but we got to foresee, like, this could easily affect a large portion of this area.
Here, I'll just have fun because I always push back on you, Becky. let me push back on you too. I feel at this moment, and it's just at this moment, and I can be critical of myself in this moment, but in some sense, this is a much ado about nothing. And that sounds insulting, but the reality of it is that the city has not embraced future growth through density. So I would agree with you in principle that if we have slated areas that we anticipate future growth and density and accommodating the variety of styles of housing in the city, it's no longer such much ado about nothing. Most all of our multifamily sits along Parish Lane or a commercial corridor behind Main Street. And the Southwest community has in interpreting from their attending the hearings, they've held the substantial amount of weight of multifamily development. And so where we find the tension is we have an odd place where the Hive was zoned because of the trailer park having 51 pads, and we needed to find a zone that matched that density. And so they threw the RH over the top of it to match that density, but it's right adjacent to a single family zone. That generally is there are some cases to it, but you don't have such significant ripe opportunities for development until the city wants to upzone for densities. Our densities are built out for the most part, some isolated parcels maybe, but they're built out for the most part. So I would say that if we are going to grow as a city and we're going to embrace some additional density areas, even using the same densities that we have in place today, if we're going to embrace that, we need to identify that. And I agree, we start treating things differently. But I think the council just wants to fix that if anybody redevelops, we got a buffer in place that at least minimally protects it.
So let me just respond to that. I appreciate your comment, Corey. And I think you're right on the temperature of what has happened as far as density is concerned in our city. I do think we have to recognize that there have been some redevelopment in the South. There has been some redevelopment in the South that has caused some concern for higher density. There's still a lot of agricultural land in the North that could potentially also have some redevelopment that may or may not be a higher density.
Well, the current general plan says no.
So we don't even have to worry about that.
Don't have to worry about it. Till that changes.
It would take a lot of changing to worry about that.
It would take a lot of changing.
That highlights, I think, Corey, you've done a much better job of articulating something that I was trying to say, is that we need to come up with what we believe are the priorities for Centerville. And currently, Centerville is a little more interested in making sure that we preserve the historical feel as opposed to making radical changes. And as a result, I think Spencer's suggestion that we look for a one-size-fits-all, or at least a simple approach, is good. I'm inclined to try to inject into whatever we solve an escape hatch, whether that be some degree of an exception, as long as we can try to define that and make it enforceable and viable in a simple solution, so that it allows those outlying situations to be treated more leniently than they otherwise might receive under our ordinance. And that would then help those people that want to develop properties that are able to get through the legislative and administrative process and maybe get some exceptions to the rule. And I don't know if that necessarily means we're going to have to go with a variance approach or whether we're going to have to go some exceptions. But that's, I think, Spencer, you have a really strong point in the idea that it would be nice to just have something that is easy to apply. And as long as we inject something in there to give planners, developers, and planning commissioners the ability to vary as the more extreme cases come in, that'd be great. Now, I say that knowing it's really hard to do that.
Well,
I can't believe Mason's telling a developer that he should be developer friendly.
Well, one thing, I'm going to read Becky's comment. Yeah, it doesn't allow RM in the north end either. The northwest and the northeast are single family only zones.
Even though we have several RMs already existing?
Yep.
Because
Yeah, the only way Pioneer redeveloped is that there was allowance that if you were within a certain distance of parish to encourage some multifamily housing on that distance, and that's how the Pioneer Nursery was roped into that. But anything further, like Greenfields up to the north, Pheasant Brook, they're all old developments, and the general plan of the city says no more.
So they were allowed and now they're not.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not allowed. I think we've been at it for a little bit. So how about I take that suggestion of simplicity along with exceptions. I can have a conversation with Lisa because we always debate the state requirements of variances, which we interpret to be very narrow. And then we have exceptions, which, you know, with conditional uses and all the other subjective criteria, we get attacked at the task force and the developing community because we're too subjective. And how about I take a conversation with Lisa and we come up with this hybrid that shows you some simple application. I'll glean and listen to this to adjust that simplicity. And then we'll also look at this exception / variance and see if we can come up with criteria we feel comfortable and findings for. And then you could debate that and you could reject it too if you want.
Sounds good to me.
Planning Commission, I love that you guys did not let me down. I figured this one was going to be one that we just kind of came at and chewed through, and we did. So I say that in jest, but I really do appreciate this commission so much for being willing to come out and look at things from different sides and really openly debate issues like this. I firmly believe that it helps us create a better product in the end.
And do it respectfully as well. I really appreciate that too.
Yeah.
I want to say too, Christina, like I sorry that I talk a lot. So if you ever are like, shut up, people, like I want to say something, just jump in. Like that's how my family is. You just have to speak a little louder and then we'll let you talk or something. I don't know.
I'm not a talker, so you guys are great. So I just love to listen.
Awesome.
Okay, moving to the next item. So last week you will recall that I tried to skip the community development director's report. This week, I think that we failed to get the community development director's report on the agenda. And so I am making special effort to invite Corey to give us a community development director's report.
Well, there's a couple of things, and I apologize for not getting that director's report on there. I was so concentrated on trying to get reports on there, I didn't do that. So that's my fault. But yes, you have a meeting. We have I think an item, and I've also planned to start the discussion on the transportation element for your next meeting. So we'll get going on that. We also have Lisa is chiming in because we have a discussion about emails and communication with the Planning Commission, in which, you know, me and Lisa are really reserved that you're accosted at the grocery store about what you should be hearing about a certain project or an application. So there's some discussion about how to get comments. How can the public communicate with the commission and do it appropriately? So Lisa, I'm kicking it over to you if that's okay, Shaylin.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Well, I know it's late, so I'll try to be brief, but just to sort of step back, the city would like to provide a city email for all planning commissioners. We should have done this already, but we are working on our IT during this pandemic. And so that was one of our priorities, is making sure that you have a city email to conduct city business. So those emails are being generated this week and will be sent out to you. I wanted to have a chat with you, however, before those are sent to you, and just remind you that as you get this city email, we do want to encourage you to use it for all city business. but to not use it for any personal or private business use. And actually, the state law prohibits you from using a city email for any kind of political purpose. So don't send out any kind of, hey, vote for this, or any kind of school issue. Just make sure to use it just for city business. Occasionally, I will say I get some kind of political email into my city email, and I always just send an email right back saying, I'm not allowed to receive political email on this account. Please take me off your list. And then I delete it. So, but this other issue has come up as well, that perhaps people should be able to have a button on the city website to contact the Planning Commission. And so I think as staff, we're a little hesitant to have direct access to the Planning Commission by whether it's the public or developers. I know this probably happens, but I think the suggestion right now is that we're going to create that button when those emails go out. Right now, the plan is that will go out automatically to each of you at your city email, but staff members will also be copied on that so that we can monitor what is going out to you. So for instance, let me just give you an example of my concerns with some due process issues. Let's say we've had some controversial public hearings and we've had plenty of them, and we decide to close the public comment period, the public hearing, and we're getting ready at the next meeting to make a decision on a pending application, and the residents continue to provide public input to the planning commissioners, and the developers don't get to see this. They don't know what people are saying to you. This is whether it's city email or even in the grocery store. I have the same concern. I think that the laws are set up in a way to allow developers to understand what residents or others are saying about their project and being able to respond to those issues, and also to conduct the city's business in public. And so if you're having all of these conversations behind the scenes, it creates some due process issues. And so I've always drawn the line with, hey, you can chat about things with planning issues with people, but when we have a pending application with a developer before us, my recommendation is always for the planning commissioners to just say at the grocery store, wow, that's really good comment. I wish you would come to the public hearing and put it on the record so that we can all hear it. Because when each one of you hear something or someone lobbies you, it's outside the process. You're not getting legal advice. You're not getting planning advice. We can't, help you understand the issues and add some advice. I mean, I'm not saying you have to have an attorney help you with everything, but there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. In my opinion, it's not always fair to the applicant to have these conversations behind the scenes. So anyway, we've been requested to provide a planning commission button on the website. So we will be providing that. I guess we just have to work with this, because my question then is, okay, are you now going to individually respond to those? I don't want a dialogue. I don't want you to have an electronic meeting where you're all having this conversation. So I don't know how. I think we're going to have to think through that a little bit more. Our recommendation on whether to respond or how to respond. But once you push that button, people are expecting that the planning commission, hears it. So maybe it's just something where staff says, thank you for your email. It's been forwarded to the planning commission. But, and Corey, I don't know if you want to weigh in on our response, but I think early on, my request would be to probably just take those emails. I mean, currently, I tried to explain that we already do that. If a member of the public wants to submit something to the planning commission, they submit it to staff, either Corey or Mackenzie, and then Mackenzie forwards that on to you. So we already have that in place, but I think the pressure has been to have direct access to the planning commissioners, but I think we just have to be very cautious with it.
One of my concerns is, and I agree with Lisa, is protecting you as commissioners' roles. You're not elected officials, and you're not representing the community at large in an electoral type situation. You're citizens representing your city in the best interest with planning planning law and doing your best to plan for the future of the city. So I want you to feel protected in the sense of that people are not sending you, bad, threats and all kinds of things like that, because I think that's just not fun as a planning commissioner to feel like people look at you as a way to either get back to you or I'm going to unelect you because you're not following my ways. And I think Lisa's right. We need to set that when that button's pushed, that staff has an automatic response form email saying this has been all verifying that it's been received, and that inviting them to participate in the process at the meetings and reminding them, because a lot of folks, I mean, you've heard it from applicants. They'll call you council while you're commissioners. They call the council commissioners sometimes. The public does have a common misperception of the planning profession, that when they come to the meeting, they think they're there to influence your vote, and that this is a voting type meeting. And if everybody's against it, how dare you vote differently? Because we're all against it. They don't understand your role. So I do think we need to put in, like Lisa said, some protection of you to say, look, we've received it. We encourage you to participate in these meetings, whether we get detailed enough to say the next meeting will be held on X date, so that you don't feel the need to have to respond to them individually because they complain they're not being heard. They need something that says we got it, and that you got it, and that it's in your email box. But not a dialogue of saying, well, what do you think? What are you gonna do?
Can I make a suggestion? I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate the balance you're trying to achieve here. And I actually specifically with the Hive property was approached by several people on many sides of it. And I specifically said exactly what you said, Lisa. I said, this is great information. I really hope you can join us for the public meeting and put this on the record and let everyone, thank you for trying to talk to me. There were other people that said, do you want to just talk to me before this? Can I give you my thick? And I said, no, thank you. You can come to the public meeting. So it's hard because you still want to have a relationship with these people, but you also want to create that due process. So for me, my recommendation would be, if you are going to put a public button on the website that goes specifically to us as planning commissioners, that we have the ability to have a thing that says, thank you, we've received it, da, 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 da. And then if you want to follow up and say, the next thing is this day on da, 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 da. But I don't think if there's no response from the planning commissioners and we've put our stuff on the website, that to me seems like a little odd. So I would say if you're putting our email addresses out there and it's on the website, then we should be the one that has the automatic response, or that I feel comfortable personally saying, thank you so much. We'll put this in the public comment, or we'll see you at the next meeting, or whatever it is that you want us to say, the automatic thing.
Can I jump in here? I think that one of the if we have a button and the public can submit comments to us, if I was a member of the public and I was really interested in something and I got back a form email, and which I agree, I think that we should just send an auto-generated for everybody that says, thank you, we've received it. But if I don't get any response back from any individual commissioner at all, I'm thinking, well, great, they received it and they ignored it and they're not listening to what I'm saying. And so I would think whether we want to be very explicit in what we send back to the public as saying, thank you, we've received it. The planning commission is advised not to correspond with members of the public about this type of matter. The appropriate forum to talk about this is at the planning commission. Do you know what I mean? So that they understand why it's not just we've received your comment, but that they've been expressly told that they're not going to be expecting a response from any member, because this is something that we have to talk about in public.
So
I don't know.
I think it depends on, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, because it does depend on the circumstance.
But yeah, we talked about putting some kind of disclaimer language on this, because I do want to say that, you know, this information will go to the planning commission, but please note that if it is outside the public comment period during a pending application,
Yeah.
the commission may be advised, you know, they won't be allowed to take it into consideration for that application. So you are encouraged to do X, Y, Z. And I guess we could add even language to that to say, you know, this is a one-way communication. We've had, you know, but I don't know if we want to go there.
Just think about it, because I think that the more upfront we are with people, the clearer we are with people, the less frustration there is going to be. Because if people are sending, if they're clicking on the button and they're submitting their comment and they're taking time to do it, and they feel like it's just going into this empty zone where nobody is really responding or caring, I think that's what they're going to get the perception of, and that's not right. So I want to make sure that we're clearly communicating to people.
So what would be the point of having a button if so I guess my idea is like, are we creating confusion among the public by having a button there? And if we are creating confusion, then are we going to not only create confusion, but angst if there is no response? I would personally feel comfortable having a form response that I can say something above that says like, thanks so much, this is for your stuff, this is what we are required, and then it has it, boom, and then I can send it, because I don't want it to be like, I didn't read it, or it's this form thing, and why the heck do you even have a button for them anyway if they're going to just get it in the same way? We have to kind of decide if what we're doing is creating more.
Well, but then you're the administrative burden on that. So then every commissioner is having to respond with that type of a form thing. I mean, I just am trying to think of a way to streamline it so that it's consistent.
That's why I'm like, should we have a button? I don't know.
Well, no, but I mean, if we receive comment through the form, then the button, that would have all the appropriate disclaimers about this is one way or whatever else. But if somebody were to email us directly to our city email, then we're responsible for responding with the appropriate response, whether it's come to the meeting or, you know, thank you, whatever. But through the form, we don't need to respond through the form because that's already been handled.
That's an interesting comment, kind of like how we handle our grandma requests. We have a form that's, you know, they can fill out. It's an online form. That's an interesting concept, because I am seriously concerned. I don't want this button to replace the public comment period. And I don't want to, you know, I want to encourage people to come to the public hearing, because that's really what the law requires. And so, yeah, I do have a lot of concerns with the button, but maybe let us think about Kevin's idea of the form. I think that's a great idea, because you put this and it's less of an expectation. It just says, hey, do you want to, you know, do this? And I mean, the intent wasn't that they actually see your email. It's just, you know, they don't necessarily know where that button goes. But we did talk about, you know, early on, I had suggested that the button just go to a staff member and then staff review it and send it on. But then there were some concerns about staff monitoring.
Yeah, I'm one that raised it because there's kind of two parts to this, and we're laser focused on the issue that you have an application pending before you and in the disclaimers on that. But the broader perspective I had with the council member, and I raised some very cautionary concerns about this, but the broader perspective that came to me is, okay, Corey, outside of a public process, how can citizens let the commission know the things in land use that concern them? And I don't think that's a bad argument. How can the public engage with you outside of an application to let you know what things are happening in their community that they have concerns with that are not at an application right now?
Especially if we're citizen planners I mean, yeah, we're not like voted in and elected, but we are representative of those in our city. Supposed to be.
I kind of like that. So the form could be set up more of, hey, do you have any general comments for the planning commission? Please be advised if there's a pending application, you need to submit it through that process. But no matter what, we're going to have to monitor this. It will be subject to grandma. We have to retain it. You know, there's just a lot of things that go along with a button. And then also, if we do get information, we're probably going to have to make it part of the record, you know, and there might be a couple times where we say, hey, let's extend the public comment period because we've received these 20 emails that we don't know what to do with, and we know you've all seen them. So.
Yeah, the other thing I raised was if we go to this generality issue of communication, my concern about staff filtering it is that the public may perceive that staff is filtering it and you're not getting the communication. So I wanted something to go to you to make sure the staff is not, you know, if I missed an email or it didn't get into my box and I didn't forward it to you, it now becomes another critical point that staff is hiding things from you.
I want to maybe be the fly in the ointment, if that's okay. And sometimes I'm sorry I play that role too often. I don't think that having a button is a smart idea in terms of cost benefit for planning commissioners. As you guys know, we derive our authority directly from the elected officials, and we're not here to represent the public. If the public has something that they want the city to do, then the city council ought to, at an open mic, let them come in and talk to the city council, and the city council can direct us as their derivative authority body to address something, to come up with ideas for ordinances, to reshape the general plan. I don't know. I'm concerned that this would veer us away from what LUDMA authorizes us to do towards something that is more akin to a city council member.
I'm with you, Mason. If you panic, all of you said we don't want an email, we're not taking it, then we can send that message back.
I'm concerned too. I already said that I was concerned. And I'm also concerned if we do it, that I will then be put into a light that's like, and now she's not responding. I don't like that idea either. Like, not only the legality of it, but also that I have relationships in the city that I don't want people to think that I'm just suddenly not responding to.
And I think that highlights the hard part about being a planning commissioner. Nobody understands what we're supposed to do. We barely do. And yet we're handcuffed to do administrative decisions and follow the law without discretion in many regards. And yet we also have to wear a legislative hat as derived from the city council. We have to educate the public and ourselves at the same time as we're trying to abide by the narrow restrictions that we have to live within. And I don't think a button is going to allow us to do that very well.
Well, and if you did do a form with any kind of feedback, it should say something like Mason saying, let this, like, for a specific reason, just know there's legislative and administrative. I love that we added that to all of our planning commission agendas so that people understand, and that Shaylin says that every single time. This is a legislative decision. This is an administrative decision, because that education has to happen every single commission meeting, which is why sometimes I ask dumb questions so that we can educate. So I hope you guys are all patient with me.
Lisa, do you think that you could go back and maybe tell them that we as a commission, we're concerned about this, and do they really, really want it? I think that Mason raises an excellent point. I mean, it's hard enough for us to know which hats that we're wearing. This is just going to complicate the issue for us and for the public. Is this really a good idea?
Yeah, I'm willing to go back, and I mean, we will be creating the email addresses for you to, use for city business, but I think this does merit additional discussion. I think the Planning Commission has brought up some good points, especially about how are you going to respond, and the obligation to respond, or the, feeling like you need to, because I do think that it's going to create an expectation. I sent an email to somebody, and I want to hear back. And that creates a whole nother layer of concern. So why don't we try that? We'll just say, hey, we need to push pause on this, and we'll come back to you at the next meeting and see what the result is. But I have the same concerns. So.
Excellent. Anything else for the Community Development Director's report?
No, and I might get kicked off. My battery's running low, so I will try to plug it in.
Okay. Well, the last thing that we have to do is just minutes. So we'll do these very quickly. We're reviewing the August 12th minutes page by page. We'll do this as usual. If you have any changes or comments, let me know. We'll start with page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. The chair will entertain a motion.
I make a motion. Oh, go ahead, Becky.
Aha. I move to accept the August 12th minutes, unamended August 12th minutes.
Second.
That was bad.
It's almost like y'all are ready to be done here or something. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you guys, everyone. You're great. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. See you guys next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.